Good Disruption, a lively discussion between UVA Darden School of Business professors Yael Grushka-Cocaine and Mike Lennox on cutting-edge technologies and practices that are challenging the status quo.
All right. Hello, Yael.
Good afternoon, Mike.
You ready for the end of the school year here? We're kind of in the mad rush to the end of the year.
Oh, yeah. I'm ready for the end of the year, although I will remind you that our professional degree students have school year-round. So it is just getting started for us.
That is true.
Yes.
School is a 12-month phenomenon here.
Correct.
Well, I thought to start today, we always do it at the end, but I want to do it at the beginning today, and that is to thank Becky and Gary. So Becky is our researcher extraordinaire. She makes us sound smart. For our listeners, if you haven't figured this out, I'm actually an idiot. And my kids can confirm this. And so having Becky is like really, really valuable. And then Gary, of course, our producer. Gary makes us sound good. Listeners might not know this. Yael is actually from South Boston. So that accent she has, it's an AI phenomenon. We take her voice, we figured the South Boston accent wasn't really appropriate.
I wish.
And so that's what
Yes,
you get.
yes.
That's what you get there.
I wish that Gary did something magical with my voice and my accent. Well, that's a story for another time.
Just give us back your Boston accent, like park the car in Harvard Yard. Can you give us that?
I cannot do that. I cannot, nor will I try. But yes, they are the secret behind our success, and we thank them for that.
We do thank them for that. I'm from Philadelphia, so I actually have had a Philadelphia accent that I've had to train myself out of. You know, how to say things like water. Water is how we say it.
Yeah.
The sports franchise there is the Philadelphia Eagles,
there
not
you go.
the Eagles. So
well,
I've gotten better.
To bring it back to our topics and to good disruption, I would say that there is a conversation, before we dig into the exciting topic of today, there is a conversation that I've been part of related to how AI and the use of generative AI tools might imply that we're losing some of our lingos and some of our accents and some of the dialects and different languages. So that's a conversation for another podcast, but definitely something on people's mind that actually keep your Philadelphia accent.
And keep your South Boston
Thank
accent.
you. Okay.
Well, Yael, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think that you're going to really love today. Today's going to be different and exciting. We're going to talk about something that I have been trying to get on our podcast for a while, and that I have a soft spot for, because we're going to talk about fashion and 3D.
I'm in trouble.
No, you're not. We can make it relevant to you and make you passionate about it. We're going to talk about 3D fashion. Have you ever heard of 3D fashion?
I haven't. Let me just say, I'm so excited. No, what we're not talking about. We're not talking about AI.
Okay,
because we've talked about AI so much, and everybody's talking about AI, and this might be AI adjacent in some ways, but there's lots of interesting technology. So I am excited to learn more about fashion and 3D fashion.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit around, first introduce us a little bit to the topic and what is disruptive here. So when we say 3D fashion, is it clear to you like what exactly we're referring to? Like tell me your interpretation.
Well, again, my naive perspective is immediately going to 3D printing. And the ability to use this technology to create materials and forms that maybe you couldn't easily craft in a traditional sense.
Okay, beautiful. So you're thinking of the creation of brand new materials and brand new forms and maybe designs that otherwise don't exist before. Let's back up just a few steps.
Tell me how I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong at all. You're on the right track. But just to kind of make it clear why this is an important topic and an important industry, the textile industry market in general, like, do you know how big it is? How much it's valued at?
Tell me.
Yeah, well, it's $900 billion. It's getting and approaching very, very quickly the $1 trillion mark and even exceeding it. We're talking about a huge business, a business that is not necessarily slowing down. The digital textile market, so textiles that are created digitally, 3D printing being an example, in and of itself is over $2 billion and going to quadruple in the next few years as we're thinking about it.
So this is a real thing. This is a real market right now.
Correct.
That's out there.
Correct. A real market, a real interesting market that's emerging that I think is really pushing our imagination in ways that not everybody appreciates. So let's talk a little bit about why. Why would one want a digital textile? Why do we need innovation in this space? Why do we maybe need disruption?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you recall, but we've had a few students over the years start various startups thinking about trying to minimize the waste.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? Does that sound familiar to
No,
you?
no. A kind of a sustainable track on this, because this is an industry that I know does create quite a bit of environmental impact.
Yeah, so 20% of the global clean water pollution is really coming from dyeing and finishing the various textiles in current day textile production. So there are some big environmental issues with the more traditional approach to creating textile and creating these materials that have to do with how all the value chain along the way, the processing, the working with the livestock, or however, back you want to go, there are steps along the way that could be improved upon. There could be more sustainable. They could decrease the impact on the world in the ways that we've talked about before in terms of sustainability motions. And this avenue of 3D fashion or digital textile is the way to think about it.
Well, tell me more about that. Like, how does the 3D printing aspect help address some of these issues?
Yeah, there's so many parts of the process that incur waste. Mm-hmm. Everything, if you want, from flying to trade shows to watch, the upcoming trends, creating prototypes that end up, on the floor and end up being tossed away. Material that is produced at high volumes, but then only a fraction of it actually used based on whoever's going to buy and purchase the items. So along every single step of the supply chain, you can find inefficiencies that today are leading both to environmental harm, but also to waste.
Yeah.
And if we can improve along the way, everything from transforming the fashion industry into maybe a more digitally susceptible industry, like, for instance, trade shows and fashion shows, maybe they could be done in the metaverse that you and I have talked about, or materials can be created for individuals based on, to order kind of situations. We're reducing waste and we're finding ways to reduce the negative environmental impact all along the way.
You mentioned prototyping, and I remember we had a student years ago in the iLab incubator program who was creating jewelry, and she was using a 3D printer we had there to create her prototypes. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have seen such dramatic advances in 3D printing that this is not just about creating prototypes, correct? Like, we actually can do industrial scale mass production using 3D printing?
It's a great question, and it's one to think about in the context of fashion, is what is preventing the 3D printing to come in and totally disrupt the entire fast fashion type of industry? Like, can we get it to produce at scale to the Zaras of the world and so on? That's a great question. We're getting closer. I'm not sure that we're quite there, but we're getting closer, and those are great questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves in terms of envisioning this entire industry. But right now, in addition to the fashion shows, we're talking about speeding up processes, we're talking about shortening lead times, we're talking about, yes, samples and prototypes for sure, but also made to order and efficiencies around the ordering process. And we're talking about the various ways in which we can also push our imagination and just be more creative and not work on century-old techniques that we've done so far.
Now, when 3D printing first started to be popularized and, the machines were getting cheaper that people could buy them for their homes, there was a notion that maybe we'd start printing more and more objects, just at our house. Talk about, shrinking the supply chain to just literally our home. Are we seeing any of that in fashion? Or is there an attempt to kind of produce on the location of consumption?
There are a few smaller organizations that are working direct to consumer, but by and large, where we're seeing the activity and where we're seeing the change is really at the more industrial type level and working with the fashion houses and working behind the scenes, not direct to consumer quite yet, although time will tell, and that's probably very soon to come. And I can imagine the generation of teenagers today that are growing up that can start creating their own, not only accessories like you were describing and jewelry, but actual garments for their house. But companies like Adidas or known brand names that have been experimenting with some of their products, and those are going to the consumer, of course, not replacing the Adidas, but actually building in some of that 3D technology into the products that they're selling.
Makes sense. Makes sense here.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have 3D sneakers or soles that were 3D printed?
If I do, I don't know that. Right?
There you go.
so I really doubt it, right?
So that's another question and an interesting one. Do you think that consumers would care about this? Do you think that this would be a good thing, or do you think that consumers would be concerned in any way, shape, or form if they were told that their shirt was 3D printed or their shoes and their soles were 3D printed as opposed to made from old-fashioned materials?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, my kind of quick reaction to that is, unlike some things we've talked about with AI, for example, again, I don't see why I would have a negative reaction to that. I mean, I think as a consumer, we care about two dominant things here, right? The quality, the look, and then the cost. And how you produce it, the means you do that, I might care about the environmental impact and the social impact, but in terms of having a concern that it's 3D printed, I don't at least immediately have a reaction like that.
And that's a lot of, that maybe is a positive kind of indicator that this is an industry that maybe could embrace additive manufacturing and 3D printing. A question to you, Mike, you're an expert in all things disruption. Has the 3D kind of wave disappointed so far, or is it meeting expectations in terms of what it's delivering?
Well, I think it's a lot like a lot of technologies we've talked about, right? That there are these S-curves we've talked about, and there have been dramatic improvements, and probably wider spread adoption than I think most people realize. However, I think the hype cycle had gotten to a point again where this idea we'd all have 3D printers in our homes and we'd be producing parts for a broken machine we have in our homes, and that hasn't fully come to fruition. And so I guess some might say it didn't live up to the hype at this point. But I think again it's probably not recognizing that some of these, especially these industrial usage, are really accelerating here.
Okay, and I think this is a great time for us to actually bring in somebody who knows a little bit more about this field and can tell us what it is that we've missed and what we don't know enough about.
Thank goodness. We need that.
Well, Mike, I think you're going to be blown away by our guest. I am super excited that we have not only an expert in 3D fashion, but one of my really long time and old friends. Naomi Kaempfer is the creative director for art, design, and fashion at Stratasys. Naomi, thank you for joining us and welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Yael. It's lovely to be here, and I'm super excited to participate with you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the type of things that you are in charge of and the type of projects that you have, just so our listeners get a sense for your work?
Sure. So first of all, maybe I should mention Stratasys is one of the leading companies in 3D printing technologies. And since 2014, we've been doing different, primarily sculptures, I'd say, for the fashion industry. And these were kind of the crazy kind of structures that you would imagine Lady Gaga or Bjork wear in a concert. And as we progressed, we noticed that there is a growing interest for the fashion domain to have solutions created by 3D printing for actual garments. In 2018, we developed a new technology allowing us to 3D print on fabric. So maybe I should say there are a lot of different methods, technologies that are relevant when we speak about additive manufacturing. Our focus for the domain of fashion is mainly a technology called PolyJet. It's a super high resolution technology that allows us to 3D print with full color and different types of physical properties of material onto a textile. So we started with that and developed a totally new domain within the company that provides services for the fashion market and for the haute couture market.
Fantastic. I love it. And I can imagine in my eyes what it looks like. And I've looked at your website, which is stunning. So thank you for that. Mike, I can tell you have a question for our guest, and I do too, but I'll let you go first.
Well, Naomi, again, thank you for joining us. And I do find this fascinating. And I'm curious, what do you see on the creative side? And what I'm interested in is the technology following the creatives? Are they coming to you saying, we really like to be able to do this, and can you help us? Or is it perhaps working the other way, where the technology is inspiring the creatives to go beyond maybe what they've traditionally even thought was possible?
Thank you, Micah. I love your question, and I think it touches really the heart of this activity. Being a creative director, you want to balance, first of all, the needs of the business, the technical developments, and bring those to the market. While at the same time, you are also ambassador for the creative sector. So you are listening to the needs, the wishes, the aspirations of the designers and fashion designers, and they challenge you to develop your technology. So it's a bidirectional fruition where we grow on one hand by developing things that we think might have an answer and an added value for the market, and also try to answer constantly the requests from the designers we work with and discover new novel solutions. So it really goes back and forth, and this is the beautiful dialogue that we do between the creative mind and the business mind.
That really resonates with me. In the academic literature, there's this debate about technology push or demand pull, and surprise, surprise, the answer is it's both. And I like what you were saying about bidirectional there, that it's like almost co-evolving together. That's really interesting.
Naomi, from your perspective, is this something that would ever hit the masses? Is this something in Zara's future or H&M, or is this always going to end up being kind of high-end fashion?
Yeah, so yeah, of course, we need to understand that the larger the scope, the larger the market, and the more machines that are being consumed, the more resin and material that is being produced. Of course, we're talking about going from small scale to larger scale, and that also drops prices. We see this with any kind of technology. I think a nice example is what we experienced with 2D printing. I think you remember when we were students, we needed to have an A4 paper in color, and we went to this local print shop and we had to pay, I don't know, $30 for that one page of color print, and it was a real effort to get it done. So I think today everybody has their printer at home, the price per page. So I think every technology goes through this kind of evolution, and it has to do, of course, with the scale of the technology and the adaptation into the market.
Now, my understanding of 3D printing is that we've made great advances on the material side, that what might started off as plastics, now we can do 3D printing with metal and a whole host of different types of materials. What are we seeing in specifically in the fashion industry in terms of the types of things you can 3D print?
So first of all, we need to understand that the 3D printing world indeed is a conglomerate of many different materials. We can start with ceramic, metal, different types of polymers. So it is a very, very large scope. I think what is also very, very interesting about this market, and I think we need to pay attention to that, is that the game changes to the fact that it's an all digital manufacturing technique. We're used to go to operate machines, produce a certain stock in a certain area, deliver it through ships or different logistics to another country, distribute it to the different stores and to the different outlets. When we speak about digital manufacturing, one could email the product, or one could download the product and maybe print it in your local store, or maybe print it in the future at your home printer. So the whole a game of commerce, logistics, a personalization, design process is a very, very digital, global, and also allows the consumer to digitally connect to the process. So it's not so interesting only to discuss what kind of materials we have, and for sure the majority of materials that we relate to today are different resins, different polymers, whether they are biodegradable or other types of photosensitive polymers. But we need to look at this industry as a completely new entity. And when we talk about supply chain and the whole creation and development, this is for the first time that the whole process is digital. I mean, you store the things digitally. Whether if we talk about H&M and Zara, Yael, which you earlier mentioned, these are companies that generate very large stocks, usually in the Far East. Then they are delivered. Part of them are being sold, and usually 80% of those have to end up in the recycling bin of those brands that did not sell a certain edition or a certain season
Yep.
of products. So here we're talking about a product that is digital, fully customizable, made to fit the consumer, made to the taste of the consumer, maybe even representing the aesthetics that consumer chose, maybe done to fit through the body scan of the consumer. So we're entering a new game, a new understanding here. Also aesthetics that are could be just anything. They could replicate gemstones. They could replicate any kind of organic or static material. We're able to realize through this technology, in a way, any kind of 3D design aesthetic that you would see in a movie, like let's say the science of Avatar, but then you translate this into reality. So also the whole game of aesthetic becomes a realization of much of the fantastic aesthetic that can be created with 3D softwares.
Amazing.
It makes me think, and maybe this is, I guess, maybe a classic question in fashion, between the idea of a world in which we all have kind of bespoke individual styles and fashions, and now the ability to literally create clothing, just for me and my personality. And yet there seems to be a social pressure for conformity, right?
You have two kids. I have two kids. We feel those pressures all the day. All day.
And Naomi, you need to know about me. Like I wear the uniform, right? The guy uniform here. I got a button-down shirt. I got slacks. How is this opportunity for again bespoke and very personalized design, and like, how do you think about that as a supplier to fashion houses versus this pressure to like everybody has the same thing? And I would just observe like social media, again, having children who are now getting a little older, but there's like what's showing up on TikTok, and then suddenly everybody has the same outfit on. So how do you think about that maybe tension that's there?
Yeah, that's a very exciting point, and it's also a question of how rare it is. So if somebody has an item that you see online or somewhere else, and you want the same thing, is it a limited edition? Is it something that's available to everybody? That's also a very big question. We see also a very funny hype. Yael, you mentioned earlier Adidas. You mentioned the different footwear industry. And we see a very funny hype to bring in the language, this technology, this innovative language of 3D printing, so the layered technology. Even if shoes are created with injection molding, they still carry this kind of layered language so that brands can talk about themselves being active with this buzz of 3D printing. So as you say, your kids would say, I want that. I feel that there's also this wish of consumers to have a bite of this hype, to also have something that is 3D printed. We see the shoes of Zellerfeld, they're all fully 3D printed. We see brands, we're working with the high-end and the couture brands. This is the moment for them to show the latest and the greatest, the humanity in its intelligence, developing this novelty of 3D printing. So that's also kind of a wish to be there, a wish to be with the novelty, a wish to be part of this evolution and this new offering to the market. And for sure, we will. The more we get used to this technology, we will see more things that are maybe made in larger sequences, in larger editions. But there again, it's also an opportunity to keep the sustainability topic in mind and to create editions that are bespoke or variate the series of prints, and have also series that are limited in number or that are desired because they are limited. So that's also a part of that.
I want to push us in maybe a slightly different direction for a moment, and maybe both of you will tell me that this is not a good way to think about it. But Mike and I have talked about precision medicine, how medicine is evolving to be customized to the individual's DNA and genes. We've also talked on this show about wearables and technology that exists in that kind of space of sensors and wearables and sports. A lot of people have all these technologies and apps that track their health and their sport tendencies. Is there a direction that this is going where some of those industries merge, meaning now we can 3D print a new garment that also has certain sensors or tweaks on it that now measures me as a person and how healthy I am and directly links to my electronic medical record? Like, is that maybe a kind of interesting sci-fi future look, or is that not even being discussed?
I think with certainty, Yael, what you're saying is completely correct. We also need to understand that we're really at the beginning of what this technology is able to offer to the market. For the moment, we're printing mainly with resins, but we're already speaking about a future in which we can 3D print electrical circuits, in which we can implement smart technology directly to the garment. And then maybe your shirts will be communicating with you instead of your phone, or will measure your temperature, your heart rate, your brain EEG, or your medical status, and report, who knows, maybe report to your doctor when you're running. You will have all the intelligent technology in your clothing or in your shoes, or have some kind of a digital black box or a cloud that collects the data from your clothing, so that next time when you buy clothing, it can adapt the design of your clothing to what your needs are in real practice. These are things that we haven't reached yet, of course, but we can imagine already that every evolutionary step here would allow us to implement new solutions.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, and I think what strikes me is the notion of our technology, especially things like our mobile phones or smartphones, have become such a part of who we are in our daily usage. When maybe it already is, but is a fashion item in it itself, and is viewed as just part of your outfit, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm noticing we both have our phones out. They both have covers on them of different types. But does that is that the first step to a really truly customized tech that again is a fashion item that speaks to your individuality?
I'm gonna again pivot us just to keep us all on our toes, but with any technology, and we've talked about a lot of disruptive technologies on this show, there are some concerning aspects. There are some downsides. Do you hear any discussion, or have you thought a lot about the people behind, let's say, the traditional textile industry, the farmers, or the people who typically various parts of the world that maybe rely on some of their capability to generate input into the process, whether it's cotton or otherwise, or using livestock to create certain materials. Has that discussion been one that folks have invested time in thinking about? How do we disrupt and then protect those that will be impacted negatively from this evolution?
I think it's a very good point, and it's very early on in the process that it's still too early for us, I think, to address these aspects. But as you say, AI will soon replace also the capacity for 3D digital design, and we might create embellishments with 3D printing that will dismiss the need for a manual craft or a manual labor. But I think at the end of the day, there's room for all these different qualities and capacities. The fact that we have the latest and greatest iPhone doesn't mean that we don't want to have a handcrafted, a traditional carpet or quality like jacket. So it is both. I think the beauty and the marriage is by bringing the qualities together and see where we can benefit, and of course, variate within the market the beauty of both qualities.
Take us in another different direction. I'd be curious your thoughts. And this relates more to the fashion side than necessarily the 3D printing side. We've talked before about non-fungible tokens, NFTs, digital artifacts, and of course, like things like the metaverse. And in these digital environments, fashion is becoming important. Think about the game Fortnite, where you can get your customized skin, and it's again a way of expressing your personality and the like. Do you see any? Maybe the question would be like a bridge or synergies between that digital fashion world and the physical fashion world developing together here.
I think with certainty and indirectly so, since all that is being done with 3D printing technology is always 3D and digital. So every asset that can be realized can also be kept in its 3D form, in its digital form. As a digital asset, also we can authenticate and make sure that everything that is available is confirmed and it is unique and numbered and it definitely protected by an NFT or other. Again, depending each segment, the NFT segment and its own needs and its own hypes. The real tangible products with their needs and their hypes. There is indeed, of course, a room for both and interest in both.
I love it. I can maybe finally own some of my high-end, fashion house items, but maybe only in the metaverse and not in reality. But we'll see that I can afford it.
I do have one last question for you from me. This is the one I've been dying to ask. How fashionable was Yael when she was 4 years old?
This is going to be so bad. My fashion was awful. Naomi was always the more fashionable. And she doesn't have to say that.
No, I was going to say, but she has to answer now. I want to hear from her. I didn't want your answer.
No comment.
There you go. I had a good role model.
You're a good friend. You're a good friend.
Yes, I had a great role model.
I'll share that, a child of the 70s, like there's great pictures of me in like striped shirts and striped pants that like didn't match, I was like, what are my parents thinking,
Well, Naomi, thank you so much for really pushing our mind and sharing with us your amazing expertise. Folks, if you're interested, you should follow, and we'll post links on our podcast website for some of Naomi's amazing work. We're really inspired to think about these directions, and I think our technologies will evolve in interesting ways. So congratulations on all that you've done, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yael and Mike. It was such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very grateful.
All right. Well, that was fun. I've learned a lot today, but we've got the big question to ask, as we always do at the end of our podcast. So, Yael, I'm going to ask you first. Good disruption, bad disruption, no disruption, 3D printing for fashion.
I think it's pretty obvious where I fall on this one. I am so excited that we can finally kind of fulfill some of our imagination. I think we've seen a lot of talk on how we lag behind science fiction, and what was worn in The Fifth Element is something that we'll have to wait a few more years. I think these types of technologies and organizations and individuals like Naomi and Stratasys are really pushing what is possible and making it happen now. So I'm excited. So for me, it's a great disruption.
Oh, not even good,
not even good, but great.
Well,
yes.
This has been fun for me. This is not my area of expertise for sure. I think this question of bad disruption, right? I don't see the downsides. I mean, so many of the technologies we've talked about, there's always the bad side, and I don't quite see things to be overly worried about here.
I think some of the, if there were to be a downside, which has to be considered, which we talked about, but maybe there's more to explore there, and opportunity for our listeners to think about, like any other sustainability efforts, there is always what has to happen to see that to fruition. Meaning, what are the side effects, right? What other pollution are we creating just by having these 3D printing machines, or are there any negative sides? What are we going to do with people that lose their jobs because they rely on the apparel industry right now, or the fashion industry in certain ways? We have so many folks and arguably big economies that rely on apparel manufacturing and work that goes into it, either manual or otherwise, that will have to be thought through very carefully.
I thought you were the great disruption. You just gave me a lot of good reasons to worry about it. Yeah, you're right.
There's always something to think about.
I stand corrected. I think the other question I was debating in my mind the whole time is this a true disruption, or is this just kind of an additional marginal improvement in what we can do? I'm going to side on the good disruption, though, side of things here. I do think the supply chain issues and the implications for that, while we might not quite be there yet, this whole idea of additive manufacturing and how that can transform supply chains, I think will be disruptive here. And maybe it's already beginning to have some of those impacts.
I mean, if you think about the hundreds of years that we've been relying on yarn and cotton and other kind of very basic materials to create garments. And if you think about the fact that now we can start from metals or plastic to create those garments, I mean, that is a fundamental shift in the premise and a disruption, I would argue.
Yeah, well, it's an exciting future. I obviously need help in purchasing my 3D printed whatever it might be, but excited to see what that might end up being.
Yeah, fashion advice is a topic for another call, but we can do that too.
Right.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes,
All right. Well, as we did at the beginning, let me thank, as always, Gary, our producer, and Becky, our researcher extraordinaire. This is Good Disruption, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Good Disruption is a podcast from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.